Okay, so this next video here is objective 2, factoring trinomials when the coefficient of the second degree term is not 1. So again, here we go. Objective 2, factoring trinomials when the coefficient of the second degree term is not 1. That means the leading coefficient is not 1. We dealt with leading coefficient was 1, and those were pretty easy. We just had to worry about the C term, the factors of the C term that summed up to the middle term. It gets a little more tricky when we're dealing with leading coefficients that are not 1. So here's the method. The first method that I'm going to present here is called the AC method. And it is the method that I recommend that you use because it's very systematic and it provides the procedures that you can follow that always lead you in the right direction without what we'll get into later is the guess and check method. So the first step is to multiply AC and identify B. What does that mean? So if we look up here, we see we have a trinomial in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So AC is the product of this leading coefficient A times the last term there, C. So we find the product of AC. And then we identify B, just to make sure we know what B is. The reason we do that is we're looking for factors of the product AC, and we list these factors out, and we continue looking at factors of AC that multiply to AC but add up to B. So we're doing something similar to what we did before where we looked at the factors of C that add up to B. This time we're looking for factors of the product AC that add up to B. Now we use the two numbers that we found in step 2 to rewrite the trinomial as a 4-term polynomial by breaking up the middle term into 2 parts. Remember when we FOIL, the inner and outer created 2 like terms that we always combined, right? So what we're doing here is unfoiling. And then we factor using factor by grouping. So let's look at one of these. So here we have 6k squared minus 19k plus 10. Notice that our leading term is not 1. So it makes it a little more challenging to factor this problem. So the first thing we do is identify what A, B, and C are. A is 6, B is negative 19, and C is 10, which is what we're going by here. So we're going to find the product of AC. So 6 times 10 is 60. So we're going to look for factors of 60 that give us a sum of negative 19. So normally we would list these out. And I'll show you what I mean by listing them out here in a moment. But let's assume that we've listed all these out and we found the couple that actually get us to 60, such as 15 and 4. 4 times 15 is 60. And if we make it negative 15 and negative 4, notice those add up to negative 19. So we found those factors. So what we're going to do is rewrite negative 19k as negative 15k minus 4k. So notice that we're putting negative 19k in blue to emphasize that we're rewriting it as negative 15k minus 4k. So what we're actually doing here is unfoiling. So now the procedure is to factor by grouping. So notice we've grouped it. Again, remember by factoring by grouping, we separate the 2 groups with the plus sign. And remember by factoring by grouping, the idea here is to take out the greatest common factor out of each group. Which is what we do here. The greatest common factor out of 6k squared minus 15k is 3k. And then the greatest common factor out of negative 4k plus 10 is negative 2. Notice we're taking out a negative 2. Remember, the reason why we're doing that is so we can create this common factor, negative 2k, or 2k minus 5, 2k minus 5. So now we take out 2k minus 5 out of both of these terms. And now we factored that. So again, just to reiterate, we identify what A, B, and C are. We find the product AC. And then we list, I'll show you what I mean by listing these factors here in a moment. And we're listing the factors of 60 here. We list those factors. We're looking for particular factors that will yield negative 19k. Let's just assume we listed those factors and we found negative 15 and negative 4. We rewrite the middle term, negative 19k, as negative 15k minus 4k, which is what we've done here. Then we factor by grouping. And remember how to factor by grouping. We create two groups, take out the greatest common factor out of each group. Then we take out the common factor, which in this case was 2k minus 5, and we're finished. Now let's look at an example out of the homework problems. Now this is going to show you the whole process of the AC method. First thing we notice here when we're asked to factor the trinomial negative 10m squared minus 47m plus 15. Notice we have a leading coefficient of a negative leading coefficient. Anytime we have a leading coefficient of negative, the first thing we always do is factor out a negative 1. As you can see here, I've factored out a negative 1. So that's now 10m squared plus 47m minus 15. So now I calculate AC. A is 10, C is negative 15. So I got AC is 10 times negative 15 is negative 150. So now what I would do would list the factors of AC. And here's what I've done here. I've calculated the factors of AC. You may be wondering, how do I find these factors of AC? Well, you have a very powerful tool. You can use your calculator in this class, right? So what I usually do is I start with 1. I know 1 and 150 is my first factor. Then I would divide it by 2 and see if I got an integer. So I divide 150 by 2 and I got 75. I would divide 150 by 3 and I got 50. I'd divide by 4 and I would actually get a decimal. So 4 is not a factor, an integer factor of 150. Then I would go on to 5, divide 150 by 5. Then I would divide by 150 by 6. 7 wouldn't work because I'll get a decimal there. 8 doesn't work because I'll get a decimal. 9 doesn't work because I get a decimal. But I end up with 10 and 15. And eventually you may wonder, when do you end? Well, once these things start to get close enough together, you'll be able to see that you've determined all the factors of AC. So now we want to look at these factors of AC and determine which ones of them will give us 47. Remember our rules for signs. We have a positive and a negative. That means there's going to be a positive and a negative in our factored binomial. So that indicates that inner and outer terms are being combined during the FOIL process. It's actually going to be subtraction. Notice I didn't put the negatives when I listed the factors of AC. I'm just going to use intuition to determine the signs. And I didn't write it out because it becomes a lot of writing. And as I said before, a lot of times when you start writing too much, you often make mistakes. So just you do the sign stuff mentally. We're looking for 47. Looking at these things during subtraction, the ones that work are 3 and 50. The reason why 3 and 50 work is because we can write that middle term as 50 minus 3m equals 47. And that's one thing I always do. Once I find the term, I go ahead and write what I'm going to replace that middle term with. And I'm going to replace that middle term with 50 minus 3m. So I rewrite the expression. Notice I've rewritten the middle term as 50m minus 3m. Now what do I do, right? I factor by grouping. Factor by grouping. So I've grouped it. Notice I'm keeping the negative on the outside. So what I do here is now I'm going to continue to factor by grouping. Remember, factoring by grouping, I find the greatest common factor out of each group. And the greatest common factor in the first group happens to be 10m. The greatest common factor in the second group is negative 3. The reason why I choose negative 3 is so that I can create this common factor of m plus 5. So now I factor out the m plus 5. And then now I've just factored this trinomial. Notice the negative remaining on the outside there. So that's the process, and we'll look at some more of these here in a moment. So we're going to do some more on the AC method here. So here we have one, negative 2p squared minus 5p plus 12. Notice we have a leading coefficient that is negative. So remember, what do we do first? We factor out a negative 1. Anytime we have a negative leading coefficient, we factor out a negative 1. That's the first thing we always do. So there we go. We factored out a negative 1. So we're moving on to the next slide here. So we calculate AC. And this time I'm using the variables. You don't have to use the variables, but this time I'm going to include the variables. AC is negative 24p squared. So what I would do would list the factors of negative 24p squared here. And I'm looking for factors of AC that will get me to the middle term. Remember, again, we have a plus and a minus here in the trinomial. So it means that that inner and outer portion of FOIL is going to have imply subtraction. So I look at these factors here. Which ones will get me to 5? 2 and 12 won't. 4 and 6 won't, right? Due to subtraction. But 3 and 5 will if I rewrite these terms as negative 3p plus 8p equals 5p. And that's one thing I always do is I rewrite these inner and outer terms that are going to occur, because remember, I've got to rewrite the middle term, and I'm going to rewrite it in this way. So here we are. Notice that I've rewritten the middle term as 8p minus 3p. Usually it's best to put the positive one first. It just seems to work out a lot better that way. So now what do? I factor by grouping. So here I've grouped it. So now I'm going to take out the greatest common factor out of each one of these groups. And so here we go. I take out the greatest common factor out of the first group, which is 2p. Then I take out the greatest common factor of the second group, which is negative 3. Notice I've created the common term p plus 4. So now I take out p plus 4 out of both of these terms. And now I've factored this trinomial. So now we'll look at one more here. Notice that got an m cubed here. I can take out a greatest common factor here. The greatest common factor in this case is 2m. So I take out 2m. Now I've created a trinomial here. So notice my leading coefficient is not 1 again. So I calculate AC, which is 2 times negative 3. AC is negative 6. So we're looking for factors of 6 that will yield the middle term of 1. So we should list out our factors of 6 over here, but the textbook doesn't do that right now, and I showed you how to do that. The integers are 3 and negative 2 because 3 minus 2 yields 1, right? So remember, I rewrite that, and then what I did was calculate AC, right? So I rewrite the middle term. Notice I've rewritten the middle term as 3m minus 2m. Then remember, now I factor by grouping. So I've grouped them. Now, remember the process for factoring by grouping is to take out the greatest common factor out of each group. So in the first group, we take out an m, and in the second group, we take out a negative 1. Do you see what happened there? And the reason why I took out a negative 1 is because I want to create the common factor of 2m plus 3. Then I take out the 2m plus 3. Now I've just factored this trinomial here. 2m times 2m plus 3 times m minus 1. So we're going to look at another one here. We're going to look at a lot of these in this video. So it says, ask me to factor the trinomial here, negative 10m squared minus 17m plus 6. So notice we have a leading coefficient that is negative. So remember, the first thing we do is factor out a negative 1 anytime we have a leading coefficient that is negative. So I just factored out the negative 1. So now I have 10m squared plus 17m minus 6. So now, what do? Think to yourself, what do, right? I'm using the AC method because I've got a leading coefficient that is not 1. So remember, I take A times C, so 10 times negative 6. And I got negative 60. So now I would list out the factors of AC. So here we go. I would list out my factors of AC. And again, remember I said what you would do would divide by 2, 1 and 60 is obvious. Divide by 2, divide by 3, divide by 4, divide by 5, divide by 6. And anytime if you end up with an integer, you know it's a factor. If you're getting a decimal, then it's not an integer factor of AC, because we want to get integers going when we factor. So since we've looked at the factors of AC, what we've got to consider are which of these factors, again, I've got plus and minus in my trinomial, so that implies that there's going to be subtraction occurring when we combine like terms in the inner and outer. So we're looking for terms that will subtract to get us to 17m. So we look at these here, and looking at 2 and 30 would get us 28, 1 and 60 would get us 59, 3 and 20 gets us to 17, right? So we were going to rewrite that middle term as 20m minus 3m. And I always write this out on the side. 20m minus 3m equals 17m. Because remember, I'm rewriting the expression here. Notice I rewrote my middle term. Now what do? Remember, I group it, right? Because I'm going to factor it by grouping. So I've got two groups here, 10m plus 20m, plus, separated by a plus sign, right? Negative 3m minus 6. So I would take out the greatest common factor out of the first group, which is 10m. Then I would take out the greatest common factor of the second group, which is negative 3. Notice I've created a common term there. So now I take out the m plus 2, and I've just factored this trinomial. Now there is a special case in the homework where we're given a trinomial that doesn't have a leading coefficient of 1. And when we calculate AC, we get something very large. 980 here. 10 times negative 98 gets us 980. So that would be a very tedious process to list out all the factors of AC. Let me show you a little trick here. So what we're going to do here is list the factors of the first term and the last term. So the first term is 10, right? So the factors of the first term are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. I indicate this by the F for the first term. Then I list the factors of the last term, which is 1 and 98, 2 and 49, 7 and 14. A lot less factors to deal with here. So what I've got to do here is look for combinations of these factors. And again, we have plus and minus, so it's going to be subtraction. What I do is look for combinations of these that will get me to 7. Eventually, if I keep trying these out, I will see that I can get 7 by using a combination of these factors. The reason being is 5 times 7 is 35, 2 times 14 is 28. So I could use the guess and check method and plug these in, but I'm going to tell you that you can go ahead and still use the AC method, because what we're looking at is 35 minus 28 is 7. And actually 35 and 28 are factors of AC. So what we've done is taken a little shortcut there to find the factors of AC. So what we're going to do is rewrite the equation, rewriting the middle term as 35x minus 28. We rewrote the middle term, right? So now we've got to group it. Now we take out the greatest common factor out of each group. And the greatest common factor out of the first group is 5x. And the greatest common factor out of the second group is negative 14. So now I'm going to move. Now I've created this common factor of 2x plus 7. So I take out the 2x plus 7, and I've just factored that. So this is a little more challenging, but the best way to do it, as I said, is to list out the factors of the first and the factors of the last. You could have just went ahead and looked at all the factors of AC, knowing that you've got to get a 7. List out the factors of AC that are going to be fairly close to each other. But an alternate way to do this would be to list the factors of the first and last. You've got less factors to deal with. Look for certain combinations that will result in 7x. This is only one problem out of the homework that you'll have to deal with that has a situation where when you do calculate AC, you end up with a large AC. But if you think about these things long enough, you'll be able to see that you can get a combination. So if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm doing 5 times 7 is 35, right? 2 times 14 is 28. When I subtract them, I get 7. So now my necessary factors are 35 and 28. And if you were to check, 35 times 28 does equal 980. This is just a way that you can continue on using the AC method. So here we have another one of those cases. We've got a leading coefficient that is not 1. So we calculate AC. Notice AC is negative 1100, a very large AC. So what we do, so we don't have to deal with so many factors, is list the factors of the first and the last. The factors of the first are 1 and 22, and 2 and 11. Factors of the last are 1 and 50, 2 and 25, 5 and 10. So what we do is analyze combinations of these. And again, we've got plus and minus, so it indicates subtraction. And we look at these in such a way that we can yield 35. After a little bit of trial and error, we would see that 11 times 5 is 55, and 2 times 10 is 20, and 55 minus 20 is 35. So we could move right into the guess and check method, but you can still use AC here. We're going to use these two terms here, 55 and negative 20. Because 55x minus 20x equals 35x. That's how I'm going to rewrite the middle term. And notice that 55 times 20 yields 1100, which is actually AC. So we're going to rewrite the expression using our new terms here. Then remember, we group it. I'm going to take out the greatest common factor out of each group. (11x) out of the first group, negative 10 out of the second group. I've created the common factor of 2x plus 5. Take out 2x plus 5, and I factored this trinomial. And there's one more example we'll look at like this. So now we have 22x squared plus 49x minus 98. We calculate AC. Notice we got 2,156, a very large AC. So what I do is I look at the factors of the first, factors of the last, list my factors of the first, list my factors of the last. Now I'm trying to get 49. After we play around with this a little bit, we eventually will see that 11 times 7 is 77, and 2 times 14 is negative 28, and that yields 49. Now these take a little bit of time. Oftentimes, whenever you're working with these factors, you're going to have to keep trying things. So I can continue on with the AC method here. I'm going to rewrite the middle term as 77x minus 28 equals 49. So I note that 77 times 28 is actually 2156. So we actually found factors of AC using a little shortcut there. So now we rewrite the expression using our new terms. Rewriting the middle term, remember. So I factor by grouping. I group it. I take out the greatest common factor out of the first group, which is 11x. I take out the greatest common factor out of the second group, which is negative 14. I've got a common factor of 2x plus 7. I take out the 2x plus 7. Now I factored this trinomial.